So thank you for joining our webinar, No More Paper, focused on tokenizing bills of lading for shipping. It's just the top of the hour here. We're going to wait 2 or 3 minutes to let people sign in, and then we'll get started. So thank you for joining us. If you'll just be patient for a minute or two, then we'll get started. Well, welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Paul DiMarzio. I'm the Executive Director at the Interwork Alliance, and I'm really happy to have you here where we're going to discuss this topic of no more paper, tokenizing bills of lading for shipping. If you're aware of us at the IWA, you'll know that we build our standards based on member-defined business use cases. So our members determine what it is they want to look at, what tokenized business processes, and then we go through and systematically turn these into standards for tokens and contracts. And this is the second in a series that we're doing around these what we call business working groups that are focusing on these problems. Today, the working group is focused on supply chain and things of that nature. And this particular use case is around, as it says, bills of lading for shipping. So I'm very pleased to have our chair and co-chair, Alex and Aljosja, on the call to lead us through this topic. And with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Alex. Just do want to point out that this webinar is being recorded. So if that's a problem for you, please do disconnect. You can write your questions in the Q&A section, and we'll be monitoring those as the webinar goes on. And some will answer directly inside, others will leave some time at the end to answer. So Alex, the call is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Paul, and welcome to today's webinar. The webinar today will be on an electronic bill of lading, which is a use case that has been developed in the past year here in Europe. And today, Aljosja Beije and Claire Wermers and myself will be presenting the use case and how we are working together with the Interwork Alliance as part of the Global Trade and Supply Chain Working Group. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to give them to us, either in chat or afterwards by email. Time with the working group in making this possible. Interested in your questions and your participation. Having said that, before we start, we would like to know what kind of people are dialing in for this webinar, and so we'd like to know what your role is. So if you could take a minute and answer the poll. Are you active in maritime and shipping or in logistics? Are you in a university or researcher? Are you a banker who's active in supply chain finance? You might be an investor looking to invest in this area, or you may be with the government or with the port authority, Or are you perhaps a regulator looking to see how this will pan out in terms of rules and regulations? Or you might be a techie, right? And so please let us know, because this is of interest to us. Okay. Before I continue, I'd like to introduce my oh, here's the poll results. I'm not sure if this is presented to you. What's interesting, there's a lot of techies. 27% of them are developers. 15% are in research, which is interesting. And there's only 3% in shipping and logistics, which is interesting. I expected to see more. Well, thank you for answering this. Before we continue, I forgot to introduce the two other speakers. My other speaker is Aljosja Beije, who's the co-chair of the Global Trade and Supply Chain Finance Working Group. He will be speaking further in this webinar. And then we have Claire Wermer. She is with CMS Lawyers. She did the whole legal review of the electronic bill of lading and the token review. So we are part of the Two Tokens initiative, which started 1.5 years ago. And the Two Tokens initiative started out in Europe. And we aim to clarify the road toward tokenization and work in a very large ecosystem globally with banks, with government agencies, with startups, with regulators. And this ecosystem, is expanding continuously expanding. Part of the ecosystem is of course, also the Interwork Alliance, which organized today's webinar. Two Tokens is a public non-for-profit initiative which is aligned with the IWA, and as such, the Two Tokens is an associate member. And what we want to focus on is that we all start talking off the same page. We want to have a shared understanding of what tokenization means. If you talk to a bank, they think of tokenization as something completely different than when you talk to somebody who wants to tokenize assets, or somebody who's in cybersecurity who uses tokens for access to systems. Tokenization can also be used for new ways of funding, by fractionalizing ownership or by raising funding. So all these items were discussed in working groups and roundtable sessions, and we decided that the three silos that make up tokenization, being the financiers and the banks on the one hand, the legal regulatory folks on the other hand, and the entrepreneurs, those three silos need to come together and come to a shared understanding. So the IWA started this summer. We were very glad that this initiative was started. The IWA, unlike Two Tokens, is a member-driven organization with a steering committee, and it focuses on creating standards that can be used all over the world, which we applaud. The electronic bill of lading that we will be presenting here today is a very good example of something that should be a global standard that should be adopted by other ports and shipping companies around the world. And the IWA is a member-driven organization that can make that happen. So if you want to become a member of the IWA, please contact Paul or Jackson, or go to the website. But the way we want to drive standardization is through working groups and by looking at use cases that are actually being used, and which is completely aligned what we're all doing here in Europe with Two Tokens. So to that end, the Global Trade and Supply Chain Working Group was started a month ago. And our mission is basically the advancement of tokenization to drive global trade and supply chain. And as I just said, we are all for standards. We are all for one common language in the way tokens are issued, tokens are created, how contracts are made, and how analytics are done. So the purpose of the Global Trade and Supply Chain Working Group is that we come up with this framework, and the initial scope of the Global Trade and Supply Chain Working Group is the electronic bill of lading, which has been developed in the last 15 months between Europe and Singapore, and this is the initial scope of the GTST. What should not be forgotten is that the EBL, yes, it's 50% technology, but the other 50% that drives adoption is the legal and regulatory alignment of EBLs, and we'll get into more detail in today's call. But we want to make sure that you understand that it's not just the technology, but it's all these local governments and local rules and regulation that drive adoption. So for anybody who hasn't noticed yet, but this year has been quite a year in terms of trade finance, due to COVID-19. We noticed, and Aljosja, this is your cue to also come in the call, but that if you read the papers, the Financial Times, that a lot of goods are stacking up in the ports, and trade finance is really seeing the impact of COVID-19. And COVID-19 and bills of lading in particular, have a very interesting dynamic. I live in the port of Rotterdam, which is one of the larger ports in the world. And during the first wave in the spring of this year, we had a lot of containers sitting on the dock in the port that could not be cleared because the bills of lading had not arrived by plane. There was no planes flying. And as it so happened, bills of lading are a legal document, and to transfer title, the real physical bill of lading is required. And so we were in a situation that the goods were actually here, but they couldn't be cleared by customs because the bills of lading had not arrived with the flights from China in this way. So an electronic bill of lading would have really been a solution here. And when you tell people this, they find it very hard to believe that this is in 2020 still the case. Bills of lading have existed for over 650 years. And in every civil code in the world, they have a legal meaning. So to enable electronic bills of lading, we're going to have to make a lot of civil code amendments to accept electronic bills of lading as well.
Yeah, if I can add something to that, it was not only because it was difficult to book a flight that made the containers stack up here in the port of Rotterdam. It was also the simple fact that people just didn't want to touch paper that was touched by other human beings. So you really had this situation in China where couriers that normally pick up the documents at the shipper, for example, just didn't go there and simply didn't want to touch the paper document itself. So that also aggravated the whole situation. And also in the last couple of months, there have been quite a lot of supply chain finance or trade finance irregularities that have been discovered, some so bad that, for example, in the Netherlands, ABN AMRO, which is a leading Dutch bank and quite actively involved in trade finance, actually stepped out of the whole industry. And that was because they financed products that simply weren't there, although the paperwork was all there. So it's there's actually now a perfect storm happening with, on the one hand, COVID, and on the other hand, the need for more reliable and more secure ways of transferring ownership.
Yeah, so COVID-19 has really put everything in a pressure cooker. According to the same article in the Financial Times, there's a cumulative loss this year, $9 trillion US. So if you look at what can be gained, by implementing electronic bills of lading, is staggering. But needless to say, the project of the electronic bill of lading was initiated in 2019 between the Port of Rotterdam with support of the government in the Netherlands and the Port of Singapore with the support of the government in Singapore and the support of the European Union and several other instances. Maybe this is the time for you to introduce the consortium and tell us a little bit about that, Aljosja.
Yeah, for sure. Before I start, I think I need to get a little bit more precise. We've been talking about the electronic bill of lading. And actually, we are focusing on one particular part of that electronic bill of lading, and that's the fact that it can be used as a negotiable document. So our real focus is on the negotiable side, so proving at any given point in time who's the owner or the holder of a particular document over various platforms. So that's where the interoperable part comes from. It's therefore not electronic bill of lading solutions such as Bolero or SDocs, or if you want to stick to the blockchain world, Cargo X, or what TradeLens is building. We focus on two main things: the fact that it has to be interoperable, and that's what we do by using the Ethereum mainnet as an overarching layer. And we focus on the negotiable part, where we really are interested in ensuring that there's only one single holder or owner of that particular title at any given point in time. So as Alex already mentioned, project started out with Port of Rotterdam, BlockLab, which is actually part of the Port of Rotterdam. We're 100% daughter of the Port of Rotterdam. And our partners in Singapore, the Maritime Port Authorities, and IMDA, which is the Ministry of Information and Communication. And it quickly got supported by a number of organizations within the Netherlands, our Ministry of Economic Affairs, but also 2 tokens, and that is actually a European Union project. And also we work very closely together with the Dutch Blockchain Coalition. And last but not least, of course, Interwork Alliance, when we was very quick to show interest in what we were doing, and in what is when most people think about tokens, we think about cryptocurrencies, so we think about money, but actually there are so many other potential use cases for tokenization. I think EBL is actually a perfect example of an additional use case. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and Aljosja, there was just a question from Kartik, how we could elaborate how this is different from TradeLens, and we'll get into that right now, Kartik.
Yeah, definitely. I'll answer that question later on. Just a little bit of background. I think most of people here know that international trade is, to be honest, a bit of a mess. It functions, but it's very paper heavy. There's a lot of machine to paper to machine processes with all the downsides, a lot of manual handling, a lot of errors, and also the vulnerability to fraud. I already mentioned that in the last couple of months there have been quite a lot of cases, especially in Singapore, but also in Argentina, with international with trade finance deals going sour, because the documents that were used as kind of collateral, for example the bill of lading, actually turned out to be non-existing shipments, or there have been multiple times used as a collateral to obtain financing. So you're talking about multiple financing on the same cargo. So there's lack of interoperability because everything is in silos and no common standards. So all this together, if you look at it, account for about 20% of the cost of shipping. So that's quite a substantial amount. DCSA, the Digital Container Shipping Association, calculated that there's a savings of $4 billion US to be made within the industry with an adoption rate of 50. When an adoption rate of 50% is made possible of the electronic bill of lading. So there's substantial savings to be made. Next slide, please. To answer the question, how is this different from what TradeLens is doing? I already touched upon the fact that we focus on interoperability and negotiability. We don't focus on all the other business rules that are part of an electronic bill of lading solution. So that's one part of the answer. The other part is that our software is totally open source. We don't have a commercial aim with developing this software. You can go to GitHub, you can download it, you can download the software, and you can implement it into your own software. So that is, I think, another important difference. Unlike all the other existing EBL solutions, we also look at the legal side. And that's where it gets a little bit more technical. If you look at how current EBL solutions work, they work on a contract basis. So when Alex and myself, we decide to use the electronic bill of lading solutions of, for example, TradeLens or CargoX or SDocs or Bolero, doesn't have to be a blockchain. He and I, we need to sign a contract, and that contract governs our transactions. But the paper bill of lading is not governed by contract. It's governed, as Alex already mentioned, by the civil code. And that has a lot of advantages because everybody, all the cases that we have seen and that has led to litigation, etc., have already happened over the last 650 years. So people know exactly what they are up to, and they know exactly how, for example, the Netherlands deals with electronic bills of lading versus Singapore. So that part, nobody wants to touch. And there's a very simple reason for that, because it's bloody complicated. And we decided, and with we, the Port of Rotterdam, Port of Singapore, if we don't address this legal harmonization issue, we will never see the adoption of digital bills of lading. Because as long as the civil code says ownership transfer can only be done on paper, we're still stuck with a paper document, and that can continue to 2100. Just imagine 2100, we're teleporting, but we're still using paper documents to transfer ownership. It's ridiculous, but it's because somebody needs to take the first step to start changing the law. And that's where we think we have an advantage, because we work on the basis of a government-to-government relation. It's the Singaporeese government and the Dutch government who both want to set the right example. So another main difference is our focus is on the development of standards. We are not developing a commercial product. Yes, you can use the digital utilities that we are developing into your own software. It's open source. You can use it freely. It's on an Apache 2.0 license. But we're not interested in building a commercial solution on top of it. And I think that's CargoX and TradeLens, etc., are very much coming from that angle, which is fine, but that's not our goal. Third is the accreditation structure. We're actively working together with UNCFACT in order to get not only the standards developed, but also the standards accepted and accredited in that respect. And it is not really a solution we're developing. Again, it's a digital utility. We develop a system, an SDK that allows people to integrate the token, for example, into their own software. Next slide, please. So I think the design principles, I kind of touched upon it already quite a lot. It's public and permissionless. We run everything on right now on the Rinkeby testnet, but we are really working towards pushing it towards the Ethereum mainnet. The data is off-chain. We don't store any data, so we're not after your data. Frankly, we don't care what kind of data is inside. We use the electronic format of the EBL. We wrap it inside the token, so we hash it and we wrap it inside the token, and then it is again hashed, so that we can always verify that somebody really. When somebody sends you a file, you can always verify that actually, yes, this is the file that actually is wrapped within the token, but that is not something, we don't store the data anywhere. That also brings to, we're payload agnostic. We really don't care how you submit your EBL, whether it's Edifact or whether you're using state-of-the-art JSON. It's open source, and it's MLETR compliant. So that's the model law of electronic transfer of records that was initiated by the United Nations some time ago. And this is a model law that prescribes how you can transfer electronic records and the ownership associated to it. And next slide, please. So if you look at what we are developing, we've developed the token, a little bit more on that later. We can provide proof of origin, so we know where the token is coming from. We can provide proof of integrity. That's because the payload is captured within the token. And we can provide proof of ownership, because that's basically what we do, ensuring that there's always one single owner of the token. And what we are currently working on is really proof of identity. So ensuring that there's a robust identity system in place that allows ownership to be transferred using the Ethereum mainnet. And that is actually in line with what the Dutch Civil Code will say in terms of requirements. So we're very closely working with the Dutch Ministry of Justice, the Dutch Banking Association, in order to get very clear what are the requirements needed in order for you to feel comfortable with the fact that this transfer of ownership is now done digitally. And next slide, please. So if you put everything together, then then you would end up with this slide, I would say. You have carrier EBL system that they can use whatever they want. They could even use TradeLens as an EBL system that will produce an output, a native EBL data format that is wrapped as a document payload within the existing ERC 721 standard. And that together creates the ERC 721 based token. There's some functionality associated with it. You can issue it, you can transfer ownership, and you can burn it. That's it. That's the functionality that we support. And of course, there is the various proofs that you can provide, the proof of integrity, the proof of ownership, the proof of identity. And there's a kind of smart contract. There's a smart contract associated with it in order to ensure that there's always one single holder of a particular document. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we developed the token. We're now working hard on further expanding that token. We are starting with the first pilot shipment. It's cashew nuts from Vietnam via Singapore to the Netherlands with a carrier, with a client. So we have our first pilot up and running. That's going to produce, of course, more input in order to further develop the token, but primarily also to answer some very, I would say, nasty questions that, or as I call it in this slide, things we know we don't know, or things we know but we don't have all the answers yet. So basically, the things we know that we don't know, and there's quite a lot of. So I expect that these pilots will result in further development of the TradeTrust token and also the identity framework. And of course, we're very much looking at security issues, and that's primarily also because of the fact that we want to use this application for real. The end of this project is going to be the first negotiable, interoperable EBL transaction without any paper. That's the aim of the project, and that is what we are working on together with the both governments to set up an environment where we can do that. And then identity and security, of course, become very, very critical. Next slide, please.
So, of course, we'd like all of you to join us in the global trade and supply chain, but there's this poll, and Jackson, maybe you can start the poll. What do you see as the biggest advantage of tokenization in terms of bills of lading? And does this mean greater transparency with transactions? And does this mean enhanced security? Does this mean improved traceability? Do we give increased efficiency and speed, or, last but not least, reduced cost? What we aim to do while you answer the poll is to find other parties besides Singapore and Rotterdam to join us in this EBL initiative, and to start using this implementation between other ports as well. Right, Aljosja?
Correct. Sorry, my phone was, or my microphone was muted.
Yeah. All right. So I guess let's see how you all, answered. And 44% thinks that an EBL will increase efficiency and speed, which is obvious, and only 22% thinks that greater transparency is something that the EBL will give us. Interesting how you all think about this. We've done this webinar a couple of times, and it's never the same results. This is also the cue to introduce our lawyer in the working group, Claire Wermers. She is with CMS Lawyers, which is a global firm. And as part of the working group, and the working group consisted of people in legal, in technology people, logistics, and CMS looked at the legal review of the token that is used and the token classification. Claire, can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit to what you've done? And the mic is yours.
Thank you, Alex. Well, I'm a lawyer at CMS, indeed, for 15 years now. I advise on regulatory and corporate law issues. I'm not based in Rotterdam, but in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. And what I did on behalf of 2 tokens, I looked at the legal classification of the token. I appreciate that the legal side is not as exciting as Aljosja's input, but it is important, because what you don't want is that everything is up and running and that you receive a letter from the regulator that you triggered a prohibition, or you needed a license, or well, you needed to file certain information, and that you have to stop the project. Well, indeed, the token has been classified as a utility token. But when we look at the legal side, we have 2 regulators in the Netherlands, the AFM and the Dutch Central Bank, and they look at the token from an economic perspective. Generally, we have three classifications. The first one is the transaction token, transaction used to transfer value. Transaction tokens can be regulated, but depending on the structure, they can also be structured outside supervision. Then we have investment tokens, often used for funding. Typically, investment tokens are regulated. And we have utility tokens, well, tokens to get access to a service or an application. And these are typically not regulated. Indeed, as also included in the white paper, the tokens have been classified as a utility token. But there are, in Europe and in the Netherlands, there are no specific regulations for tokens. So what you should do is look at the characteristics and see how they fit into the regulatory framework. When we look at the TradeTrust or the EBL token, they are unique, they are transferable, they are created on demand. As such, they do not represent any value. It is possible that the underlying smart contract represents a value, because it can include arrangements on the delivery and the value of the underlying goods, but the token itself does not represent any value. It serves as a proof of ownership. Well, I do not, no worries, I will not go through all the legal details, but I do want to highlight a few important qualifications. And the first one is whether the token qualifies as a security. If you offer securities in Europe, you do need a prospectus that has been approved by a regulator, which is very, well, which can be expensive and can take some time. Well, securities include shares, bonds, but also tokens can qualify as a security if they can be considered as an investment, and if they generate a certain return on investment, and if they are transferable. Well, if we look at the EBL token, in our view, they do not qualify as a security, because they are not an investment. They do not represent any value. They are not traded on a capital market. No prospectus required. Another important regulatory assessment is whether they qualify as a financial instrument. because if the tokens qualify as a financial instrument, the platform requires a license, in Europe at least. Financial instruments include securities, options, futures, and other derivatives. But again, if we look at the token, they represent no value, and they can also not be settled in cash or other tokens. So in our view, no platform license required. And a more recent requirement we have in the Netherlands is that it's a result of the anti-money laundering directive, is that if you provide exchange services, so if you can exchange tokens into fiat money, so in dollars or euros, you need to register with the Dutch Central Bank. And also, if you offer wallet services, you need to register, which means that you also have to comply with all kinds of know your customer requirements. But also in the current structure, these services will not be performed by TradeTrust or the other parties involved. So no registration required. So, well, there are other potential regulations, but in our view, the tokens as they are structured right now are not regulated. They are unregulated utility tokens. And we should be careful. If new services will be added to the token, for instance, payment services, they can be under supervision. And well, it's also possible that the regulatory landscape changes. For instance, we have some new European initiatives. But at this stage, we say, no, it's an unregulated utility token.
Thank you, Claire. And it should be said that what the Two Tokens project has created is an online roadmap where people can, that takes users in a question and answer, way through to show what kind of token is and if you require help from CMS, for instance, if you have a security token, utility token, whatever.
Yeah, or another advisor. No, indeed, available online, and it gives you some flavor if your token is regulated or not, which is very helpful, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Claire, for being here. And Claire already alluded to it, but the complete legal review was actually chapter 6 in the white paper, which will be published soon, one of these days. It's done and it's now with the publisher. So, which brings us to EBL and the token taxonomy framework. We started working with the token taxonomy framework beginning of this year when it was still part of the token taxonomy initiative. It should be said that this was exactly what we were looking for, although Aljosja and the technical people at BlockLab basically created the token taxonomy, with their bare hands, if you will. But with the token taxonomy framework, that would have been great if we had that beforehand. So Aljosja, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Next slide, please. I think what really drew us to the token taxonomy framework was that when we started the project, we really didn't give, and I have to be a little bit careful, but we really didn't give that much thought into what kind of token it's going to be. We knew we're going to operate it on the mainnet. We knew that it had to be non-fungible, so then you automatically come up with ERC 721, and there you go. And what really attracted me to TTF is the fact that, yeah, it's very nice to go and build all kinds of stuff, but yeah, if you're not careful, you end up with a legacy, a pile of legacy software that that is non-interoperable, not transferable, and not maintainable. So I think that there was a kind of natural connection where we, as Alex said, building stuff with our bare hands, and then on the other hand, you have more of a conceptual look at tokenization. And I think that perfectly came together in the project. We took the first version, the version 1.0 of the token taxonomy framework, and we started looking at, okay, what kind of properties do we have? What kind of behavior do we want to, does this token have? If you put all that together, you kind of end up with a conceptually sound token. And I think that's something that's work in progress. We have done an initial analysis, but as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do several incremental steps in the coming months based on pilot outcomes, based on what we learn from identity part, based on what we get as feedback from the Dutch government and the legal side of things. So it's something that is, it's a roadmap. It's something that's developing gradually. Next slide, please. So if you, I already mentioned, we took, when you look at a bill of lading, it's non-fungible. Every bill of lading is unique. So you end up with a token base that has to be non-fungible. So that was step one. We also looked at a number of behaviors, indivisible. Now you could argue, and it sometimes happens that bills of lading get split, and then you kind of create a sub number, and that is current practice. But we said that is something you rather not have. It's better to burn the original one and then create two new ones. So the divisibility can only occur after the burning of the first original. It needs to be transferable, of course. It needs to change ownership. There's also a form of supply control. Well, everybody needs to be able to create, the carriers need to be able to create basically almost an unlimited amount of bills of lading. So you cannot really cap it. So there's in terms of supply control, it's not like a central bank limiting the amount of new money that can be created. But it needs to be burnable, so you need to be able to destroy it, which is also quite contrary to crypto money. You don't burn $100, yet a bill of lading at a certain point in time, its life cycle ends when it's returned to the carrier upon import of the container. So it needs to be burnable. Mintable, so you need to be able to create it, and there's certain roles attached to it, like the holder and also the beneficiary role. And that was already also captured in the earlier picture that I shown about the overall architecture, is that the token is wrapped around a payload, and the payload is the original data set file. So there's a file as part of the property sets. And it produces the below formula that is basically a formula created by the token taxonomy, based on the token taxonomy framework. Next slide, please. So couple of things that we find out that we are looking to further extend the token taxonomy framework, the role of burner, and also adding the role of beneficiary. That last one is also causing quite some confusion with our legal people. That leads to very interesting discussions. To summarize, one of the lawyers, who is a former professor in maritime law, he understands about 80% right now. So we're getting there. It's slowly but surely we're progressing. To be honest, my knowledge of the legal side is at a steady 40%. So that I have no desire to, or no dream that I will ever become at his level. But there are interesting discussions and how you want to grow, how you want to really assign responsibilities to a role, for example. We're currently, of course, working very closely together with IWA. We do that through the Global Trade and Supply Chain Work Group, where EBL is part of. Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's going to be a process that will see the expansion of the token, and the token becoming more sophisticated over time. With basically the end result, a global standard that can be adopted. Next slide, please.
So with that, we have the final poll for today. Do you believe that the electronic bill of lading will work? And would you be interested to join us in the GTST, global, and count me in? Or do you think this is just innovative and you want to learn more? You think that this is too complex but achievable, and you're excited to see more information? You see a lot of hiccups due to regulations and changes in the legal landscapes, but not impossible? Or do you think this is, we're smoking something, that this is too complex, not achievable within the current climate? I would like to thank Paul and Jackson and Aljosja and Claire for setting this up. We had a really nice attendance for today. This COVID-19 year has been quite a year. So Aljosja and myself, but also Claire and the whole team, we've been doing over 100, these are the polls. So count me in. 36% of the people are interested to join. Well, that's good, Aljosja. Nobody thinks that we're smoking something. That's also good news. So, but a lot of people think that this is complex but achievable, and excited to see more. Wow, thank you for the vote of confidence. If you'd like to learn more, if you'd like to get a copy of the white paper, send us an email. This webinar will also be posted online on demand, so you can see it back, or if one of your colleagues wants to see it, you can view it back again. And with that said, I think this is the time to hand it back to Paul.
Thanks, Alex, Aljosja, and Claire. Wonderful presentation, great information. I'm getting lots of great comments in on the chat. There are some questions to answer. If you guys open up your Q&A dialogue, you'll see a few there. But before we get there, I just wanted to make one key point. I mean, you've noticed, and Alex has said, that the work that's being done here actually predates the existence of the IWA by about a year. But they took that work and brought it back in and mapped it against the TTF and found, really just with a few adjustments, there's a strong match there. And if you look at what we're trying to do in the IWA, we're looking to investigate multiple use cases across multiple industries and come up with a standard that serves all. And even if a project is already in flight, bringing that work back into the IWA, mapping it to our standards really is valuable and beneficial to all involved. So, keep that in mind as you move forward. There were two questions put into the chat that I'll pose because they're not out in the Q&A and you guys might have missed them. I just don't want to lose them. One question from Mohan said, what would be the interoperability between digital tokenized bill of lading and legacy, since everyone may not be open to change at the same time?
Aljosja, want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I think that we are not expecting people to change their legacy systems. TradeTrust is payload agnostic. I earlier mentioned that if you want to send if you want to use a data file based on Edifact, you can still do that. So you can still use SDocs or Bolero or whatever as a way to create your EBL. The only thing that we take care of is the tokenization of that particular EBL, but you still use your own legacy systems.
Great, thanks, Aljosja. So going over to the dialogue then, we'll just take these top to bottom while we have time. You mentioned that BOL can be tokenized, but what about tokenized payments to allow end-to-end processing on the chain?
Yeah, I would say that of course is a logical next step. I mean, cryptocurrency is still frowned upon, although it's getting better and better. I mean, 5 years ago, I got involved in the Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Bitcoin at that time only in 2013. At that time, people were thinking I was a half criminal. Right now, both presidents of the European Central Bank and the IMF, they say, okay, cryptocurrency supported by central banks is the way to go. So I think once that becomes
yeah, this is one of the use cases that we're working on with one of the central banks here in Europe, where they want to use a CBDC, which in my mind, a CBDC is not really cryptocurrency, but it's controlled by the central bank. And they're looking at use cases, how the CBDC could be used, among others, in supply chain finance. So.
Okay, great. I want to make a point that if you panelists are still available after the top of the hour, we'll continue to answer the questions. This is being recorded. So if anybody has to drop off and you want to hear the answer to your question, you'll see we'll email you the recording and you can catch it that way. Because I think we may just run over 5 minutes. So the next question is, 20% of the cost is documentation, not in bulk. Do you guys understand that question?
Yeah, so well, it's more of a comment, I would say. Yeah, could be. The comment about, or the figures we got were from research done by IBM in 2014. So could be that it might fluctuate a little bit, but I think based on my own experience, more than 20 years of worldwide logistics in 3 different continents. If I see how much people are working and doing nothing else than typing over bills of lading, I think I would say it's pretty accurate, but could be. Again, I don't understand, or yeah, what does it mean in bulk? Yeah.
Well, but perhaps the question means bulk goods, which is different from container goods or packaged goods.
Okay, could be. But then with bulk goods, you normally have a lot of transfer of ownerships because a lot of bulk goods are commodities that are being traded. So.
Yeah.
Could be. I was thinking in bulk processing. Sorry, I'm an IT person, so I don't necessarily. But yeah, it could be. But I think 20% is quite accurate.
Okay, great. Yeah, interesting question here. How many countries outside of the Netherlands don't recognize EBL if presented? Probably all. I think you guys are really.
Again, the question is a valid one, but I think a little bit more making it a little bit more precise. EBL is used globally. For example, if Samsung is sending something to the other part of the world that is also Samsung, then there are no trust issues and there's no need for a negotiable bill of lading. So and then the contract approach towards electronic bills of lading works fine. I mean, it's intercompany; they're not going to sue each other. Well, they might, but it's a bit pointless. I think if you really look at the negotiable EBL part, I'm quite sure that zero countries in the world that have legislation in that respect. So it's really this negotiable EBL that is really where we focus on, and that is where the real problem is, because that is governed by civil code.
Yeah, that's where all the delays come into play. So a couple questions on your choice of running these tokens on the mainnet, Ethereum, yep, as ERC tokens. You know, and this is a common issue that I often hear. One of the challenges with the Ethereum mainnet is the fluctuating and uncontrollable transaction costs. So basically the gas cost for running these transactions. You know, do you have any comment on this? And also kind of related, will Ethereum 2.0, change what's going on with what you're doing with these tokens on the mainnet?
Yeah. No, definitely. Yes, this is something of I would say a minor concern. When we look at what we have paid up to now for transaction costs, you're looking at max 50 cents per transaction, which is about, I would say, 50 times cheaper than pouching it with DHL. So I think, yes, the token transaction in itself is not that gas heavy, but yeah, this is one of the areas where we're looking also at can you do this using, for example, stable coins? That would be a very interesting alternative in that respect.
Yeah, we're really agnostic to what mainnet is used, right, Aljosja? I mean, whether we use Ethereum or Hyperledger.
Yeah, that's another thing. We decided because we made a very conscious decision to use a public network, because you want this to be done under the scrutiny of everybody. So I think that level of transparency is needed in order to create something that's trusted, and also it's the only way to create interoperability. I mean, you need to have an upper layer that somehow connects to, for example, permission blockchain. So,
you make a really good.
Where I cannot. What I can say right now is that we're looking at transactions cost between 25 cents and 50 cents. If some idiot is going to come with CryptoKitties 2.0, that could cause potentially problems. On the other hand, the whole development towards Ethereum 2.0 is really to increase the scalability of the solution. If you ask me, and I have to be honest in that, if you want me to do a prediction on the effect on pricing, I don't know. But At this point in time, what we have seen is transaction cost between 25 cents and 50 cents, so which I think is extremely reasonable.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point. I mean, the cost of pouching documents and sending them through courier is it can be a lot more expensive than 25 cents. So it's
oh yeah, definitely. Yeah,
you know,
it's, you know, people. Yeah, it's what you compare it with. I mean,
everything's relative.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it understood that the beneficiary would be different from the concept of ownership?
Yeah. Now we get into legal territory. I had a lot of time. I spent a lot of time explaining to legal people what I meant with ownership and what I meant with beneficiary, and they really didn't understand me. And in the end, it's understandable. We took the definition of owner from the standard ERC 721 implementation. There you have an owner. That's the person who really owns the token itself. But there are certain cases where negotiability, for example, when normally it follows a very clear path in terms of when you have a negotiable EBL, the owner is the beneficiary, and it moves perfectly along. But there are certain edge cases where, for example, the advising bank is the beneficiary, and then you have a number of steps of ownership that are that moves from carrier to shipper to I said advising bank, I mean initiating bank, advising bank, and then to initiating bank, and then you need these two separate roles, and that is something that is very difficult to understand for legal people, because they only care about ownership, and they don't care about ownership, they care about holdership. So you can imagine that before I explained to them that the owner is exactly the same thing as the holder, that took already an hour. So it's a very unfortunate choice of wording where I'm not happy with, the legal people are not happy with. The only thing is ERC 721 uses this term owner, and yeah, I could submit a change request to the Ethereum Foundation, of course, but this is it's pretty complicated, to be honest.
So more work to be done.
Yeah.
This question, I think, is a flow or a process question, and it says, for obtaining the bill of lading for tokenizing it, do you foresee the shippers themselves will create it, or do you expect the traders to create tokens from the docs they have? So what's the process then, I think, for these electronic bill of ladings for moving through the system?
I think right now carriers like MSC and Maersk already give big shippers the opportunity to create their own bills of lading. So we could basically use the output of, they do that on the systems of Maersk and MSC, but the shippers themselves create the bill of lading. Yeah, and that produces a digital native format that can be used as a payload for the token itself. There is, of course, here a real question of identity, and that is where this is one of those cases where identity really becomes important, because you need to be 100% sure that this is a shipper, that this shipper is authorized by the carrier to be allowed to create their own bills of lading. I'm actually looking at it from two different points. From a TradeTrust perspective, this is probably not something we worry about. because that is what shipper and carrier agree with each other. But I think that's the weasel way out. And the reason why I say that is because we are also involved in the development of a blockchain platform called Deliver. And there we have to deal with these kind of practical things. And this is something where identity of and ensuring that proper authorizations are in place between the carrier and the shipper are extremely important.
Okay. It's somewhat of a difference between providing the rails and how the rails are used. I mean, so everything's kind of cool what you're doing right now, and can support multiple ways. Last question, and this one, so you guys mainly are working between Rotterdam and Singapore right now for a lot of the work you've been doing with a lot of other interested parties. But the question is, as you expand, looking at other ports, other countries, are you going to do this by, first looking at the operations for validation in the use case, getting evidence first and then talk to the regulators, or do you take regulation first and then fit whatever, they say into use case? So I guess it's basically, do you build out and then go to regulators, or do you go to regulators first and then build out, is the way I'm interpreting this question.
Yeah, I think the way we have approached it right now is that
you created a coalition of the willing.
Yeah, you create a coalition. Yeah, exactly. You create a coalition of the willing, and then also it's very important that you get governments and regulators involved at the right time. And that means that you first have to show something before they have an opinion about it, on which they can form their opinion.
Okay, fair enough. So basically it's who wants to get involved, let's get involved, let's do it as a group is really the way.
Yeah.
So that basically clears out our Q&A queue. I'd like to thank you all for staying on the extra 10 minutes to do that. So that the answers are in the recordings for those who go back. So that'll wrap up this webinar. For those of you still on or listening in replay, we'll be doing the next in this series, talking about DLT security next week on November 19th. So keep an eye out for that. And everyone will receive an email from us when we have the recording up and live. And when you guys get that paper published, I'll make sure to link that in so that everybody has access to that as well. All right, so thank you again, Alex, Aljosja, Claire. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you for all those who signed in. And until next time.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.